Hi, everybody. My name is Eugene Turk. I am the Vice President of Business Development at Align, and I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar. For those of you who may not know this, Align puts on a monthly webinar where we have thought leaders from around the world share their knowledge, their expertise, and their wisdom in the hopes that such meaningful content will help you grow and scale your business. Today is a particularly special webinar for us as we're honored to have the growth guy himself, Verne Harnish, with a particularly timely presentation on setting FAST, F-A-S-T goals and how to game plan for 2021. One of my favorite shows on Netflix right now is David Letterman's My Next Guest Needs No Introduction. And I think in the business world, Verne certainly falls into that category, considering he has spent the last 3 decades helping companies scale up. However, in the event that some of you may not be familiar with some or all of his accomplishments and achievements, please allow me to give you a quick summary. Verne is the founder of the world-renowned Entrepreneurs Organization, EO, as it is better known, which currently has more than 14,000 members. And for 15 years, he chaired EO's premier CEO program, The Birthing of Giants at MIT, a program which I think he still teaches at today. Verne is also the founder and CEO of Scaling Up, a global executive education and coaching company with more than 190 coaching partners on 6 continents. Hopefully, many of you are familiar with his best-selling books, Mastering the Rockefeller Habits and Scaling Up, Mastering the Rockefeller Habits 2.0, which, by the way, Scaling Up has now been translated into 19 languages and has won 8 major international book awards, including the prestigious International Book Award for Best General Business Book. Verne also chairs the annual Scale Up Summits, of which one was held virtually just last week. He serves on several boards and is a private investor in many scale-ups. For those of you who might be interested in knowing, in his free time, Verne enjoys piano, tennis, and is a card-carrying member of the International Brotherhood of Magicians. So in 2019, Align partnered with Verne and his Scaling Up organization to create a private branded version of the Align software called the Scaling Up Scoreboard. And so we are thrilled to have him present this webinar today. Before we begin, hold on just one second, Verne. Before we begin, just one administrative matter. We want this to be as educational and informational for all of you as possible. So to the extent that you have a question, please pose the question via the chat function within Zoom, and we will direct as many of those questions as we have time for at the conclusion of Verne's presentation. I again want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and without any further delay, I will turn the presentation over to Verne.
All right. Well, Eugene, thank you so much for that introduction. By the way, if I peek the camera around the corner, you can see my piano. And I was going to be in a recital here in a couple of hours with my son, Quinn. We're doing a piano violin duet, but the snow has postponed that to next week. But it really gives me great pleasure to be able to play, and particularly with each one of my children who are musicians as well. And I also want to thank all of you for making the time right here in some sense, the off season. I don't know about you, but at some level, I just want to quit between now and the end of the year and take the rest of it off. But as many of you probably heard me talk about, I've become a real fan of this book, Relentless by Tim Grover. And Tim was the personal trainer for Michael Jordan and Dwayne Wade and Kobe Bryant. And as I was reading through the book a couple of weeks ago, I noticed when the NBA had its lockout, many of us are in a lockdown, but when they had the lockout, it was interesting. A lot of the players, because it dragged on for months, said, hey, I can back off my training and the like, and they took it easy, but not Kobe Bryant. Kobe doubled down with his training. And so when the lockout was released kind of almost overnight, the rest of the players were scrambling, but Kobe was ready. And so the fact that you're willing to take this time right now and invest in yourself in your organization this close to the end of the year after an exhausting year of 2020 is to be commended. But you win by training in the off season. And so in a way, this being the off season, I appreciate you being here. Let me share my screen. And we had an issue with our switcher. Normally I would be down in the lower right hand like we did on our summit last week if some of you participated in it, but I'll have to be over here in the corner. But it's the content, hopefully it's going to be helpful. So I want to welcome all of you. Hey, what's interesting is one of the guys that endorsed the books, Scott Fuqua, he and Mike were in my first workshop in 2005 with 50 employees. They're at 3,500. And I just checked the market cap a few minutes ago. It's not at 42 billion at the end of this year. It's at almost 60 billion. So they've had a great run as a digital company. And Scott will still tell you, I still stay close to him. I just saw him at the beginning of this pandemic. I'm all set to be his very first outside keynoter he's ever had when they restart their in-person with their big global event in Las Vegas here this coming April. And he'll tell you, it's at the end of the day, it comes down to two things that have allowed them to scale, and it's discipline and focus, which he picked up, he and his team back there in 2005, and he's asking me now to train his people and all kind of the solution providers that help drive that almost 60 billion in market cap. And he wouldn't do that if he knew it didn't work. And so I want to kind of come back, and we're going to really focus on the execution piece and around setting fast goals, not the people strategy or cash component. And so I think it's always a good reminder that at the heart of our work are really three disciplines. And if you're not achieving what you thought you could achieve or as fast as you could achieve it, it usually is in one of three areas. First, you've either got too many priorities or you didn't pick the right thing to focus on. Number two, probably the reason you're having a struggle with it. I find that when companies are like, it's not immediately obvious what is the priority today, the sprint this week or two, or what we need to focus on the next 90 days to 2021, is because we don't have sufficient data. We don't really have that clarity and foresight that comes with gathering firsthand intel, not reading the news unless you're betting on the market like Warren Buffett does, but this firsthand intel of real conversations with customers and employees, particularly with them being remote, that gives you a real-time sense. Because look, all wars, all markets have always been won through intel, through intelligence. I just wrapped up a few weeks ago, Apple Plus TV's series, Tehran. And once again, it reemphasized the power of whoever had the best intel were the ones that were the victors. And it does you no good to have this information if you don't get in a room and talk about it. And that's why at the heart of our work is this meeting rhythm that I want to kind of cover. And to give you a sense that both small and large companies continue to focus on really these three fundamentals. I don't want to overcomplicate and keep you focused on just these three decisions. I want to take you to Steelcase. I had a chance to visit them at the beginning of this year before everything shut down. And I want to take you back 20 years ago. I came to visit kind of on the 20th anniversary of them practicing mastering the Rockefeller habits. In 2000, the company was in trouble. Don Hackett was brought in as CEO. And Bob, who runs their, at the time, 12 million square foot factory, had found my book and said, all right, we're going to use these Rockefeller habits with our first coaching partner ever, John Anderson. They're outside of Detroit. And they began to practice these tools. 20 years later, in what took 12 million square feet to generate 4 billion, they can now do it in 1 million square feet. It's a better than 10x improvement in productivity. And as I got to tour the factory and kind of ceremoniously meet everybody to celebrate this 2-decade involvement with our tools, they shared how all their 3,000 employees, and I got to tour around and see it, are within eyeshot of a very simple whiteboard like this. And I'm a big fan, as Bill Gates is, of whiteboards. And you'll see at the top, they've got detailed, therefore, what we would call in our work key thrusts. Like, so what are the 3, 4, 5 areas of focus for the next several years that are going to really drive the business? And that's that kind of 3 to 5 year. And for them, it's safety, quality, delivery, and cost. But notice, even with those 4, they said, we're going to focus. Last year's focus was safety. This year's focus is quality. And in fact, if you notice there in the kind of right-hand corner, they have a theme, banish sloppiness. And so look, they're into themes, just like we encourage you to put a theme together for what would be the first quarter of 2021. What's going to be the rallying cry of what it is that you want to get accomplished. And then notice down the side is very simply organized, as we just showed, priorities, data. Now I'm going to come to meeting rhythm. Underneath that, they're saying, all right, this is the actions we're going to take this week in order to, based on this data, to achieve these priorities. And notice it's one priority in each of those areas. There's not a bunch of them. And what I also love is up in the upper right-hand corner is a reminder of their communication protocol. And I want you to see that email is a last resort. I got to tell you, trying to solve problems or anything via email is a nightmare. It's going to take you 7 days instead of 7 minutes. And notice their priority is face-to-face. Look, you can't do a factory remote, so they're there working safely. And the leadership has bicycles. And so if they want to talk to somebody, they just get on a bike and they bike across that 1 million square feet and they get face-to-face. If not, at least voice, this importance of us of vocalizing our data and information and conversation. And then video via WhatsApp is their third, but email is last resort. And then I had this chance to be in their daily huddle. It's 9 a.m. It's exactly 7 minutes. And what they found is, as John Ratliff and everyone else has done the daily huddle, every minute that your team's in a daily huddle saves 10 minutes. So they figure this 7 minutes saves everybody over an hour of what would have been useless emails and other messes that could have been handled if we just all got in a room for a few minutes. And they've got the most obnoxious alarm that goes off at the end of the 7 minutes. Now, here's what I love about the detail and the tweak. Notice still their first key thrust is safety. And what they decided is they didn't want to ever shortchange conversation around safety if it was needed. So the safety report happens first, and then they start the 7-minute clock. And it just so happened the morning I was there in January, somebody in the factory, one of their factories, had got a finger pinched in a roller, and they end up having about a 15-minute conversation about that because they take safety super serious within the organization. So this is, manufacturing. You expect them to be this disciplined. But hey, a lot of us are in the service business, if not professional services. And so I want to take you kind of the whole other spectrum. And YPO Neil Malik, many of you have had a chance to hear me talk about Neil. He runs, I think, one of the more significant PE firms. They just raised another $4 billion in the crisis. They've done over 100 acquisitions. They have another 400 to go in the next 5 years. And every one of those companies that they acquire has to go through our tools, our 2.5-day masterclass, the CEOs through our boot camp. We've got 3 more of their CEOs booked for our January 8 through or 12 through 15 boot camp. By the way, if you really want an immersive experience with me and John and 8 CEOs, we've got 2 seats, I think, open in January and a few seats in February. But Neil has all his CEOs go there because they've got to move fast and grow. And what's interesting is not only does he require all the 100 companies in the portfolio, when I was last there in person, he actually made all the CEOs stand up and say what time their daily huddle was. It's because he practices what he preaches. And so I'm going to show a little video here. I'll talk over the audio, but I just want you to see that real companies do these real things. So first, everyone in the organization is in some kind of a daily huddle where they have a chat. Notice how informal it is. They just kind of gather in folks' space. They're just chatting through and catching up. But these things are about 10 minutes on average. Then once a week, they have an all-firm meeting where they're getting together and discussing, there's Neil, every one of the firms and issues within their portfolio. They also have got their key performance indicators, their data up bigger than life, which really helps drive transparency throughout the entire organization and accountability. I love the way their offices are set up. They've had to adapt since a lot of them are remote, but this data is up on electronic boards that show up on their computers as they log in. And they've absolutely maintained their meeting rhythm throughout. So from manufacturing to professional services, this setting priorities, having data that drives it, and talking about it daily and weekly is critical. Now, at the heart of that is a real shift actually in our thinking. We're continuing to evolve and learn. And most of you are familiar with the SMART acronym for setting goals. It's been around for decades. I referenced it in my first book in 2002, Mastering Rockefeller Habits. I put it in Scaling Up. But recently, because I self-published, I'm able to update my book consistently. I just made a bunch of edits for the new version that's coming out that updates the numbers to 2020. I changed this acronym in the book to FAST. And this came from the MIT Sloan School, the equivalent of the Harvard Business Review, but Sloan puts out their own review. And about 2 years ago, they put out, I thought, a very important article that said, maybe it's time we let go of this SMART acronym and we shift to this FAST. And by the way, I think it aligns much better with companies that are wanting to scale up. And to me, it reduces some of the redundancy I saw in the acronym SMART. By the way, I can never remember exactly what all the letters stood for either. FAST has been easier for me. And so really it's 4 areas, and I want to go deep in each of these 4, but it's first, does you no good to set all these goals if you don't frequently discuss? I'm not talking about just looking, but that seeing it, keeping it visible, then causes conversation. Number 2, absolutely, as Margaret Heffernan said at the beginning of this crisis, it's time to be ambitious. You can get a hold of people. We structured a deal with Harvard. We could never have done the previous 12 years why wind was to their back, but universities have come under massive change, as all of us have in this COVID. So we've been able to be ambitious. And that's the kind of goals that you want to set, not attainable, which I think was the A in SMART. Number 3, you want to be specific. So that's like the S and the M. I think if you're specific, it's going to be measurable and vice versa. And I think the thing that was confusing is what you want to measure is what matters, and then figure out how. I mean, you want to specify what matters, then figure out how to measure it. Rather than, I think people go the other way and say, well, what can we measure? I thought of McDonald's when they really wanted to figure out consistency. And they tried everything. We're going to measure how long the French fries sit out, all kinds of things, amount of waste, because their concern was that if you've ever had a McDonald's French fry that's slightly like 2 minutes old, you could pound nails with it. And ultimately they said, we got to implement the largest mystery shopping campaign the world has ever seen. And they would literally mystery shop a store if it closed at 2 a.m. at 1:58, order the fries, and they had not been a new batch put out, that franchisee was in massive trouble. So you want to be specific about the goal and then figure out how to measure it, as opposed to, well, we're only going to set goals we can measure. And then last, and this is what I think is key, is we've got to make it transparent. And we have to use the single most powerful leadership tool that was ever created, and that is peer pressure. And we need to be clear around the research. People like teams, sports teams, are willing to play much harder for their peers than their coach or their boss. They learn more from their peers than their coach or their boss. And the power of being transparent so the peers, more importantly than everyone else, sees it, is a powerful tool. And that's really what I think Neil Malik is putting to work both inside his PE firm and across the companies in the portfolio. So let's dig into each of these specifically. Let me check on the time here. So first, when it comes to frequently discussed, that's why this meeting rhythm is important. It's the importance of having conversation, and equal conversation, as Google's research found around Operation Aristotle. And in our meeting rhythm, first, daily, we really want to get to the tactics and communicate, as you'll see in the agenda. Weekly then is to real deeper discussion focused around priorities, not a bunch of things on people's to-do lists. Number 3, then if there's big issues around that, we get in a room for long enough so we have some time to really dig underneath and get to root cause. And then once a quarter, we want to kind of reset the clock. And specifically, if you look at our daily agenda, we're really focused on what's up relative to the priorities. So once you've said, this is the theme, hey, we've got to get mobile like they did at Facebook, or Jim McCann at 1-800-Flowers, I've gotten reacquainted with him recently as he bought Worth Magazine, and we partnered then with them on some initiatives. Jim, 1-800-Flowers, he had signs lit around that said, will this sell more flowers? And that's the idea, is you're managing by zooming around or calling around. It used to be walk around till we're back in person. Jim would say, hey, what are you working on? And then he'd say, is that going to sell more flowers? And they could ask him the same question as well. So I'm looking for a pattern and causing us to frequently discuss what are the things that we're doing today that are aligned with those priorities. Then any daily metrics, clearly the metrics that are related both to your key performance indicators and this priority you're going after. Remember when Michael Dell said, we've got to get into server business. And it was every day the numbers showed up on people's screens, and in their daily huddle, every 4 hours, it was, all right, give me the updated numbers on where we are with getting servers sold. And in 1 year, they went from not being in the business to number 3 in the marketplace. And then number 3, obviously where you stuck, particularly in moving the ball forward around those key priorities. And then we see, and I'll skip this, and we'll see the same thing with the weekly agenda. We're noticed right towards the front end after good news. We want to discuss, all right, where are we with the priority? And then we want to really look at any longer conversations that would then drive your ability to move forward on that priority. So it's the meeting rhythm that really allows you to make sure that you're frequently discussing the priorities and goals that you've set. Number 2, obviously, the power of being ambitious. Again, we hosted Margaret April 8th when this whole thing hit. We rushed to the market, a virtual summit. She was our opening speaker, wrote a great book, Uncharted, couldn't have been a better title for 2020. And she said, this is the time to be ambitious. And that's why continuing to stay focused, even though we've hit a storm on the mountain, we still want to keep our eye on the summit of Everest. You guys have heard me talk about Naomi Simpson and her big, hairy, audacious goal at Red Balloon. And most importantly, you see the scoreboards up big that keep it front and center. And she's got scoreboards everywhere that, again, make the data both visible and transparent. You can't hide from the numbers. And as she's remote, I checked in with her. Their business dropped 90% in April. For the year, though, they pivoted. They're up 20%. So way to go, Naomi and her team using our tools. But about a month ago, she said, all right, it's time for us to reset our BHAG for the next decade between 2020 and 2030. And it's now to serve an experience every second sustainably. And she's got the data that she's tracking. And so it's important then that we obviously be specific about it and that it's measurable and it's being tracked real time, including on scoreboards like you would expect, that again, keep it transparent and frequently discussed, because all of a sudden when the numbers change, or wow, did you see how, and they really had a nice boost obviously this time of the year in the holidays, they've cut that time in about half right now in terms of experience. And when it then comes to specific and the S in FAST, this is where we really turn to Moneyball. Hopefully you've read the book, seen the movie. My partner, John Radley, who runs our global coaching organizations, on council with Doug, who heads up Align every Monday. It's his favorite non-business business book because, you know, we measure a lot of stuff, and he was in the call center industry, and he was on his industry's national council that even established what they call this golden award. And it was like a dozen or two data points on mystery calls put into your call center. And then if you passed it, you got these golden awards. And John took it so serious that across his 24 locations, he implemented a mystery call to every one of his 650 employees every month. Just imagine the expense of doing that, the time. And then he used that data to evaluate the performance of each of his 24 centers. And then he sees the movie. And he's got one of those epiphanies. It's 2:00 in the morning. He wakes up and he goes, wait a second. You don't suppose, like the baseball industry, we've been measuring all this stuff, but it doesn't matter. And that's what Billy Beane found, is that all this data that the baseball industry, collects and was using to set compensation and choosing what players to recruit, he discovered that most of that didn't correlate to actually winning, which is the outcome you want. And so John went back to his COO, Kevin, and he was still with him today, even though they sold the company to a $2 billion firm, and said, Kevin, we've got data on every one of our 24 call centers. And the thing we want is customer retention. See, everything you measure, you need to tie back to, but is this really correlating to the outcome we want? You've got to zero base this. And he said, look, customer retention is our best measure that we're doing a great job in a commodity business answering phones. So they went back and did the correlation, and life is crazy. You can't make this stuff up. Truth is crazier than fiction. His call center that had the highest golden quality score per these metrics that he was part of setting in the industry had the lowest customer retention. And his location down in Mississippi that had the lowest quality score had the highest customer retention. Again, you can't make this stuff up. And then all the other 22 centers, it was a scatter diagram. There really was no correlation whatsoever. And he's like, whoa, have we wasted a lot of time and a lot of emotion looking at stuff that doesn't matter? And so he went back and said, let's see if we can find the data that correlates to the outcomes. And he did. He found what I call his Moneyball stat. On base percentage happened to be one of those key ones in baseball. And that one metric was the one that he used to really measure and drive performance at his 24 locations instead of all that other stuff he was measuring. And so see if you can find that. By the way, my favorite team, FC Barcelona, they really boiled it down to one metric, ball possession. And they cut the grass different, they trained different, they had smaller players, this ticky-tacky movement, and they became the winningest team in the history of this sport by saying, look, it's a lot of stuff we can measure, but if we can control the ball, which they do on average 76% of the time, if you've got the ball 3 times more than your opponent, the chances are you're going to win. Now, their coach, their owner, all went up to Manchester City, if you're a big fan of this industry. And sure enough, they won their champions, their Premier League 3 years in a row, doing exactly the same thing. So what is your Moneyball statistic that you really need to drive the business around? And that's what John did at Appletree. And then last, we talk about this topic of transparency. We've got people on this call from all over the world. And I was in Egypt just after the Egyptian soccer team won in 2019, the big African league. They were celebrating, and soccer's huge in Egypt. Yet that morning when I'm giving this workshop, some of the Egyptian leaders came up to me and said, look, Verne, you have to understand that culturally, this idea of transparency, we're not as open to it as maybe you are in other parts of the world. And I said, but don't you love your soccer? And they go, yeah. And I said, is every one of these players' stats readily available real time as a match is going on? He goes, yeah, of course. And I said, and I assume you're going to have a team ready for what we thought was going to be the 2020 Olympics in Tokyo. And he goes, yeah. And I said, is every Olympian from every country have to expose in front of the whole world their stats real time? There's a transparency in sport that I think transcends all of our cultures. And the minute I said that, I saw a mindset change within the room. And so this idea that sometimes somehow culturally it's not acceptable to be transparent with metrics. Our view is this, and I want to leave you with it, and then I'll turn it over to Doug and Eugene and team. If I go back to this picture, and then I'll summarize. You know, we talk a lot about how we'd love to create a family kind of culture within the company. And look, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't wish my family dynamic on anyone. It's like watching Schitt's Creek, if you would. I think the term dysfunctional family is like a redundant term. And so, look, I again wouldn't wish the family dynamic on any trying to be high performing organization. Keep that in the family. But my view instead is that the best model for companies moving forward is the professional sports team, the scoreboards, the transparency, the analytics that they've really brought to the metrics. The fact that as I was watching one of the NFL games, and sure enough, they kept going, Philadelphia Eagles kept going for their fourth down because the analytics show that that is the thing that you should do is go for fourth downs. And when you should go for 2-point conversions, which happened in a couple of the key games this week. And so all the professional sports teams around having a coach versus a manager, having detailed stats in front of everybody real time, and having scoreboards bigger than life is a better model for us to scale than it is the family model. In summary, Jim Collins, where I really got our framework from, said, if you want to go from good to 3 times good, you need to have disciplined people. That's where we think coaching comes in. Disciplined thought, that's where learning comes in. And then he said, you want to apply technology in order to really drive disciplined action. And so, look, I'm a big tennis fan, big Rafa Nadal aficionado. Go Rafa. I think he's the GOAT within that particular sport. And what I love is wherever I'm in the world, I can dial in on my mobile device, as Naomi Simpson can with hers, and see real time the stats of where we're at with that particular match, down to the detail of errors and winners and aces and all of that go with that particular sport. And so that's why I was involved with the team at Line to say, we've got to bring this same transparency and technology and ease to our own companies. And it's got to be mobile ready so that you can really track the cascading priorities and data that at some point becomes an Excel spreadsheet nightmare, like early on it does in project management and it does in accounting. And there's systems we've developed for every function, for accounting, for sales and marketing, for operations. But the CEO generally doesn't have a tool to do what they're supposed to do, which is to make sure we got the right people doing the right things right when it comes to executing. And so, in summary, I'm a huge fan of pivoting to this new acronym as you set goals for 2021. Look, it does you no good to do that if you set them on the shelf, frequently discuss them. Please set ambitious goals. You might as well shoot for the moon. Number 3, make sure it's specifically measuring that which ties back to the results. Find your Moneyball stats, and then use the power of transparency and peer pressure to take the pressure off you having to be the bad guy or gal, and instead use that peer pressure in order to drive performance within the team and the organization. Eugene, back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Verne. If you would stop sharing your screen just for a moment. Thank you very much. Obviously, if you have questions, now is a great time to start putting those into the chat. I want to take just a few minutes to sort of build upon Verne's presentation to discuss how you can use the Align software or any of the other software that is powered by the Align platform, including the Scaling Up scoreboard, to make it easier to put into practice fast goals for 2021 in your organization. So building upon exactly what Verne just talked about, F for frequently discussed. It's critical to have good communication rhythms in your organization so that you can frequently and regularly discuss strategic goals and priorities. Use the software to create those daily and weekly huddles and tag your quarterly priorities, your metrics, your stucks that Verne mentioned so that they get pulled into each huddle. This way, the most important work that needs to get done is front and center and is a topic of discussion every day or every week. Obviously, you want your goals to be ambitious. So within the one-page strategic plan, there's a place for you to document your big, hairy, audacious goal. It's not just ambitious, it's audacious. And then to take that BHAG and start breaking it down into annual initiatives. Essentially, what you're doing is you're taking a smaller bite of that huge elephant in the room and you're breaking it down into more manageable priorities and strategic objectives that your team is going to see, going to measure, and going to work against or towards. Next, you want to be specific. So you want to break those initiatives down into specific quarterly priorities that can be viewed and tracked in the software's managed priorities page. So you can see the specific goals that the company, different teams and departments, and even individual employees have created for themselves. More importantly, as Verne just noted, in a peer sense, you get to see how else everyone in the organization is doing, how is everyone performing, how is everyone measuring against the specific goals and targets that they have set for themselves for success, whether that be through a key performance indicator, just some numerical value that we're trying to reach, or whether it's through specific action items that have to be completed by the individual or the organization. And finally, making things transparent. Everything about the Align software has a bias towards transparency, including the managed priorities page that I just showed you. But furthermore, you can create a company dashboard that is now visible, just like Red Balloon, that's visible to every single employee on the software that shows the gauges for the company's most important metrics and the heat maps for the company's quarterly priorities. This provides instant visibility so that everyone knows how well the company is doing against those fast goals that have been established. So in the event that any of you are not already using the Align software or Scaling Up Scoreboard software or one of our other software applications that's powered by the Align platform, we'd like you to learn more. Hopefully you're interested in learning more. I would encourage you to visit aligntoday.com/fast for more information and to even take potentially advantage of a special offer that we are providing to webcast and webinar participants until January 15th, should you wish to subscribe to the software. So we hope you will take advantage of that. Again, aligntoday.com/fast. All right, I am now going to check into our chats, and Verne, we're going to see if we can throw some questions at you.
Well, and if you don't mind, I've gone to Q&A, and I love this first question. How has music influenced how you think about work? And it's one of the reasons why, if you go back to that meeting rhythm visual, I'm showing the equivalent of a jazz band. I'm showing really music as an example. And my son, Cole, happens to be a jazz drummer. And what I love about jazz, I wish I could be a jazz pianist. I'm not that good, and I've been trying to learn. But what I love about jazz is it looks a lot like growing companies. It's free flowing. It can be chaotic at times. But what's beautiful, it's actually one of the most disciplined music forms. And as such, you can have musicians come in from all over the world who have never played together once, create beautiful music immediately. And it's because there's really three things that are in place. One, everybody understands the fundamental rules of jazz, and there are. It's like the core values that don't change. Number two, we obviously have to be playing the same song. You can have beautiful musicians, but if they're all playing a different tune, and that's really the equivalent of our vision summary or one-page strategic plan. Let's get everybody on the same sheet of music. And then number three, and that's my son's job, is you can have these beautiful, fantastic musicians playing the same song, But if they're not all playing it to the same rhythm, the same beat, it's going to be ugly. And so I think really organizations, you could say are good or great, or I could say make a lot of noise or create great music. And so that's where it's been of a real influence. And this meeting rhythm really is the heartbeat or drumbeat of the organization.
Verne, we have a question here, and feel free to answer it in terms of what is the time element for a fast goal versus a smart goal, if there is a difference? Or
yeah. Well, there's no difference, because what we're really talking about is setting a goal, whether that goal is today. And we look, when this crisis hit, we often can see no further than a day. And so my team, just like Nate's team at Airbnb, we hosted him, one of the co-founders of Airbnb that just went public and rocketed to 100 billion market cap. It's back, I saw this morning, about 70 billion, but still worth more than Marriott and Hyatt and Westwood and like Hilton all together. It's crazy. But the first thing they did, they said, when the crisis hit in March, is they all went into immediately a daily huddle. And there, like, you're setting goals for the next 24 hours. In a traditional sprint that you see in Silicon Valley, it may be for a week or two. And then obviously, what is our goal? We got to get mobile in the next 90 days, which was Mark Zuckerberg's as they were getting ready to go public. And when Michael Dell took back Dell, he said, hey, we got to get our ASQC score this year back up by 10 points. So the time frame is irrelevant. It's when setting a goal for today, this week, this month, this quarter, this year, you just want it to be fast, frequently discussed, and everything we've talked about.
In that sense, how important are yearly goals, whether they be fast or smart, preferably fast, when you have sort of no idea how things will change from quarter to quarter, particularly in uncertain times like we're in right now?
Yeah, I actually don't think and we've got some thought leaders that disagree with me on this, but I really use the analogy that there's only two things you need to be certain about. And that is your destination, the big, hairy, audacious goal. Naomi Simpson knows that she's going to get to one experience sold every second. And she beat her last one by 2 years. Hopefully she can beat this one by 2 years. And then what's the next step you've got to take? And when the storm hits, do I got to go up the mountain or down the mountain? Some of you had to scale back quickly. But what you can't do is freeze in place. And I'm going to suggest everything else in between is a wag, a wild ass guess. And so set the long term and start up the hill and adjust accordingly. And that's really the agile or scrum approach to developing robust software or getting up whatever Everest you're trying to climb.
Verne, do you have any tips for introducing fast goals to a team that has valued independent contributors and independence? Is a question that Joel has asked.
Yeah, that's why it's why we took the term strategic planning and we broke it apart and realized that it's two separate activities and teams. There's the strategic thinking piece that says, all right, that's the kind of customer we should go after with this product offering, and there's our big, hairy, audacious goal. That's the strategic thinking piece. And there's really only a couple, 3 decisions there that you as a leader need to get right. And that's why you get the medium bucks. Then the execution planning, you really want to turn over to everybody else. You actually want the front line to decide how they're going to take the hill. And if they're the ones that are setting the goals themselves, then it's going to be hard for them to disagree with the goal. And so, look, I am a big fan of the tribe. And I think that is the model we're moving to, the beehive or ant colony. There isn't a lot of middle management in an ant colony or beehive. It's everybody doing their job and laying down clues or hints, pheromones, like Google, to say that's where the food is. And if you think about it, how do we decide what restaurant to go to? We used to rely on experts in a book called Fodor's. Now we trust the crowd, TripAdvisor. And almost every single decision where we get advice, Amazon, which one, we look at the number of reviews and we look at those reviews versus some expert who says this is the right answer. And so it's actually engaging a tribe of independent thinkers who are collectively feeding into this process and deciding, all right, if that's the hill we're going to take, let us decide how to take that hill. And then they own it. I hope that answered the question.
Verne, we've had a question of how do you, or can you elaborate on the idea of how to determine the number one thing to focus on and build fast goals around?
Yeah. That is the $64 question. That is the late Stephen Covey's. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. The challenge is when you have 1,000 things to do, what's the main thing? And there's some tools. One's called Hoshin. I was just talking about this morning with our whole cohort of a couple hundred executives on our masterclass. It's a tool out of Toyota's lean methodology. We used it to really solve a significant issue between Raytheon and Thales on a project that they were extremely late on for NATO. So there are some tools and technologies that are allowing us to kind of, if you would, mine the ideas and thoughts and then figure out the right sequence, because your goal is to line up all the things you've got to do and say, all right, what's the front domino? If we can push this one over. So I'll give you an example. When, again, Michael Dell took over Dell in 2007, they were at 50 billion, but failing. He fired Kevin Rollins, the CEO he'd brought in. He really thought he was going to spend more time with his 4 kids. And he said, all right, I got 1,000 problems, but what's the lightning rod? What's the one thing that if we can get this done, it's going to fix the 1,000? And he said, it's this ASQC score that is used in the industry. And that one did correlate well. And he said, all right, that's it. We're going to move that ASQC score back up 10 points, back up to the high 60s. It had dropped to the high 50s. And that was his number for that 2007. Then he said, all right, there's 1,000 things we got to fix to do that, but let me pick the 4 that I think will drive it most. And that's where you need some analytics, and like John entailed. And by the way, if you need great analytics, almost every person in India knows how to do that from grade school. Any analytics I've just outsourced to teams over there. And he said, all right, there's 4 things we're going to focus on. And one of those was reduce the number of phone calls. He said, the data was showing it was taking on average 7 phone calls for people to do any business with Dell. Order something, get it returned, get it fixed. And he said, that's frustrating the customer. It's costing us a lot of money, and the employees aren't happy. That's what you want to do, is you want to find this one thing that's like upsetting everybody. And that was their focus for a whole 90 days. And he reported out every day their progress. And they eliminated 2 million phone calls that were necessary that quarter, which reduced costs, made customers happy, and the ASQ score went up. Now, let's set all that aside. Leader, CEO, this is again why you get paid the medium bucks. You know, trust your gut. What's keeping you awake at night? What's frustrating you? What is your sense that if we could just get this done? And so for me, when my company failed back in 2001, we had just come off a huge run, 500,000, million, 2 million, 4 million, 8 million, and boom, 9/11 hit. It's kind of like this crisis. And people have been trying to tell me my gross margin wasn't where it needed to be. And I didn't believe them. I thought I was smarter than the rest of the market, but I learned my lesson. And so our first focus was, let's get our gross margin from 42% to 55%. And in causing that to happen, we had to fix 100 other things within our business model. And we've been at 55% ever since. So that's the way to think about it. And it's iterative, it's messy, and it's testing a lot of stuff. But here's the most important thing, and I'll end with this. Pick something. I mean, the worst thing is to get frozen on the mountain. Pick something. And when you're first starting, pick something that the team can actually achieve, so you can start piecing wins together if you've got a demoralized culture. The worst thing is to pick nothing.
Verne, I think we've got time for one more question, and this one might be applicable to a lot of different businesses right now. Someone is asking if you could provide some guidance or
Yeah.
thoughts on how to scale down a business in these uncertain times with the intent of scaling back up when the business returns. The subheading was, the uncertainty is customers and employees balanced in proportion to business returning in a sustainable way that keeps employee morale high and customer satisfaction equal or better while still remaining profitable. I know there's a lot in that question to unload and unwrap, but that's, I thought I'd throw that out at you.
Yeah, we did a whole hour webinar on that topic right when this crisis hit. We put out the 5 C's for leading in a crisis. If I were to answer it in one word, it's transparency. It's that last letter of FAST. And it's communicating daily the brutal facts. People can handle it. And if you handle it with dignity and humbleness, and they know the tough decisions have to be made, they respect it if you're willing to do it kindly and keep everybody informed. And I've seen companies let folks go, but stay in touch with them. And when things came back, they were anxious to come back. We had one company, what I admired, and I think it was why they were named the best place to work 2 years in a row. And it wasn't Google or Microsoft or Salesforce. It was Hilton Hotels. I mean, come on, it's a hotel company. And I was lucky enough to buy their stock at the beginning of the crisis, and it's over doubled because they're just a well-run company, the new leadership there. And when this crisis hit, I have to tell you, I lost respect for Marriott. They just let a bunch of people go. Hilton worked to find every one of their people an alternative job. Like, what's hot right now? Delivery. And so they helped a bunch of their employees pivot over to working for companies like Amazon and others that needed well-trained. That's what Hilton's known for, dedicated, well-selected people that could go do delivery services. But those employees want to get back to what they want to do. And so as Hilton comes back online, I'm pretty sure those employees are going to come back because Hilton was there and doing their best to take care of them when this crisis hit. And look, I used to be a fan of Marriott, and Hilton was run by an evil guy. Now it's crazy how it's flipped. There's not a Marriott running Marriott anymore, and I think that's an issue. And the new leadership at Hilton, I think, has done a great job. And so I think there's our model. And we've got 4 more minutes. You want to take one more? Or you want to wrap, Eugene?
No, I'm going to wrap. What
Please.
I'm going to do is I'm just going to give everybody this slide one more time, because I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. A huge thank you to Verne for a great presentation. Again, if you're interested in learning more about the software, please go to aligntoday.com/fast. The other thing, Verne, that I wanted to let everybody know is if you enjoyed today's webinar, I hope that you will join us on January 20th at 11 a.m. Eastern, where we're going to be joined by my friend and your friend, Verne, Andy Bailey.
Oh my gosh.
Who is the founder of Petra Coach and the author of 2 books himself, No Try, Only Do, Building a Business on Purpose, Alignment, and Accountability, as well as his most recent book, Vitamin B for Business, your 1-a-day supplement for improving your business and leadership. Andy is going to be giving a presentation on creating quarterly themes to help inspire and motivate your organization in achieving its FAST goals for 2021. So till then,
I've got to weigh in. It's why Andy is on our council every Monday. He is an execution beast, and he understands themes. And this question of how you choose the right number 1 priority, he's a grand master at it, because he and his teams are out there coaching. They're leading 240 strategy sessions just this month, setting folks up for 2021. So he really knows more in his pinky about that aspect than I do in my entire being. And he's one of the most disciplined humans I know personally. So you guys are in for a treat to be with Andy Bailey.
That's absolutely true. Well, till then, we hope that everyone continues to be healthy, safe, and well. And we wish you the best for the upcoming holidays and the new year. And thank you again, Verne.
You got it. Bye, Eugene.
Bye, guys.